Wonderful. Okay, so I just want to welcome everyone here. I'm Janet Hernam from the Wong International Center, and today's presentation on co-op and the internship work permit application process is going to be given by Teresa Inacio, who's a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. We just have a few slides to get through, and then we'll begin the presentation. We do have a land acknowledgement that Acadia University is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. So we do have a few guidelines for the presentation. Please keep your cameras off. Mute yourself. You can mute your microphone, and you can submit questions in the chat box when we have the question and answer session after the presentation. And this session is being recorded. So here's our agenda, and I've just done the welcomes and introductions with Teresa. And Teresa, if you'd like to take it over from here, that would be great.
Thank you, Janet. Well, welcome everyone. As Janet mentioned, our agenda today, we're going to be looking at the eligibility requirements for the co-op internship work permit, the documents that are required and the forms, how to apply online, and we're really looking at how to navigate that online system, completing the IMM 5710, and of course, we're also going to be looking at processing times and the opportunity to answer any questions that you may have. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Yep, sorry about that.
That's okay. Great. So just to get into the terminology, which I think is important, co-op work permit or co-op is actually short for cooperative education, and which is integrated learning. So, and there's a lot of terms that are out there that reflect this. So everything from field studies, internship, practicum, placements, it all means the same thing, which is the work integrated learning component of a degree or a program. And when you do have that in your program and it's required or it's mandatory, you require this work permit, this co-op work permit. And the work that you do or this placement or this experience is also has to be approved by either the co-op office or your department, your academic department, or a conjunction of both that are involved. So regardless of whether it's a co-op or an internship or a field placement that you have, it's good to know that you must have a work permit, and that special work permit is normally called a co-op permit, and you must apply for it. Next slide, please. So just some tips, some important things that you should know. In case you're a graduate student and you are teaching on campus or doing a research assistant position, you don't need a co-op permit for that. That is just on-campus work. It's not necessarily something that's mandatory required of you, and therefore it does not require a co-op permit. There's also no fee associated with applying for a co-op permit, which is great. Students have paid enough. The other thing you should know is when you do receive your co-op permit, a lot of students are kind of taken back by seeing the employer's name is the university is listed there, and of course Acadia will be listed there. And the reason why this is there is because the co-op permit essentially is allowing the university to approve that placement that you're going to be doing, and that's why it needs to be entered there. And of course, the expiry date of the co-op permit is also going to match your study permit as well. And the other thing that students should know is this work permit, very special, and it's only for that approved work. It cannot be used for any other type of work. So say, for example, you are an intern, you were in a program that does require this work experience, and say maybe you have an opportunity to do this other experience, but it's not part of your program. You can't technically use that co-op permit for that. It has to be work that's approved by the university, whether it's the department or the co-op office. Next slide, please. So eligibility, as I had mentioned, individuals who are in a program that definitely require a work integrated learning of some sort is required to have the co-op permit. Ideally, your study permit should be valid for more than 6 months when you do apply. You don't want it to be too short. It's not going to cover your time in your placement. The employment in question is a requirement of your program, so that's something, as I mentioned, must be mandatory. Employment consists of less than 50% of your academic program, and you don't have to worry about that guideline because Acadia's all of their degree programs that have a co-op component have already kept that in mind. So the majority of your studies will be in class. And when to apply. Ideally, you should hopefully, if you've had your admission letter, include that co-op component or that work experience component. You would have applied for a co-op permit at the same time as your study permit. If not, that's okay too. You can always apply as soon as you get here in Canada. And once you get that letter, because you do need documentation to prove that you're in a program that has a co-op placement, we can begin and start your application. So some other factors to consider when you're applying. Passport validity, always something students forget. You have to be mindful of the validity of your passport because any permit will not be extended or it's not going to be valid beyond the validity of your passport. If your passport is expiring in January 2025, and you're looking to apply for a co-op permit, it's not going to be valid beyond that date. So making sure that your passport is renewed on a timely manner. Also the length of the study permit as well. It's also tied to it. So you also need to be mindful of the length of that. And it's not uncommon to be applying for a study permit extension and a co-op at the same time. And of course, if you need assistance with that, you can always come to the Wong International Center and speak to one of the advisors for support. Biometrics, make sure that you do tick off and know that you have completed it. And if you haven't, hopefully you've done it because you don't want to pay twice. I've seen a lot of students pay $85 twice and it's not necessary. Another thing that you should be mindful of is, especially students in the dietetics program, nutrition program, or in education, you are going to be working in very specific work environments, and those environments require you to have an immigration medical. If you don't have an immigration medical completed, if you hadn't done one before you came to Canada, you should have one because there will be a restriction on your co-op permit. And of course, that restriction will prevent you from working in an education setting or in a healthcare setting. So if you are in one of those programs and you haven't done an immigration medical, you should plan to do that medical as soon as possible, which will then allow you to work in those settings. Forms and documents. So the application process is pretty straightforward and it doesn't require a lot of forms or even documentation. So there's only one form to complete, and we're going to be looking at that in a little while. The INN 5710. The one thing that I want to say about this form is it's a tricky form. It's a PDF document. It's encrypted. It doesn't like Mac computers, but nevertheless, it's what we have. And I do have a tip sheet, and hopefully that will help you download it and look at it. So you do need a certain software, Adobe Reader, to look at it. The other thing that's really important is making sure that you apply with the most updated form. They keep changing. They keep updating it, making slight changes. And of course, if you had an old form from last year, that form probably already changed. So always download it from your account, okay? Digital photo, straightforward. You don't even need to go to a photographer. You can do a selfie as long as it's within those ranges. Passport, just scan the pages that have a signature, a stamp, or a visa. And of course, the most important, you must have your support letter either from the co-op office or from your academic department that confirms that you are a student educated, that you're in a program that requires a mandatory work integrated learning component, and ideally dates should also be noted there. Immigration medical, it's optional, but for those of you who are going to be in any of those healthcare settings or education or agriculture, you need to have that done. And there's no fee. And of course, it's going to be the validity of your work permit is going to be valid until the end of your study permit. Okay, how to apply? Always apply online. Now, I know that there are 2 immigration accounts now that exist. Please use your GCK, or you can go through your sign-in partner, which is your bank. That account is used for in-Canada applications, okay? There is the other account that maybe you utilized when you first came to Acadia. Don't use that account. Open up your GCP account. And the steps are very straightforward, and we do have a handout for you to look at. Once you log into your account, you click on Apply to Come to Canada. I know that sounds odd because you're already here, but that triggers the computer system to begin an application. And from there, you click onward to where you see Visitor Visa, Study, and or Work. And the next the next page that you see is a series of online questions that the computer system is going to ask you. And the way you answer the questions then, the computer then will determine on whether, on what permit that you're looking for, in this case, a co-op permit. So we're going to quickly look at how to complete the online questionnaire. So if Janet, there it is, and this is what it looks like. And we do have a handout. Maybe we don't need to go through it right now because there is a handout with this. It's going to look like this, and some of the questions can be a little tricky, and that's why we've created that guide. Okay. And on to the next slide, please. And once you've answered all the answers to the questions in the online questionnaire, the computer online system will generate this document checklist, which is essentially your application. And the application will be the co-op permit. As you can see there, it lists the INN 5710, and that's where you're going to download it from. You're going to download it from the portal right there in your account. As you can see, the 3 basic documents are your co-op letter. Number 1, if you want more details about what that is, if you click on the little question mark, it actually gives you a little bit more information. The passport and the digital photo. If you hadn't done a medical since coming to Canada, or you hadn't done a medical ever, there may be a possibility of having additional documentation there, and that would have been proof that you had your immigration medical completed. And lastly, as you can see, there's no fee, which is great. Okay. And the third step is pretty much after you've gathered everything and you've completed the form, and just making sure that your documents are not bigger than 4 megabytes. You upload everything. If this is the first time that you do your co-op permit application, I strongly recommend having your INN form reviewed quickly by an advisor. Always sometimes a great idea to have that second pair of eyes just to review it. The last thing you want is a delay in your application. It's already long enough, and any slight error or mistake could cause delay. So take advantage of the coming to see the advisors at the center who can help you with that. And here now we're going to be looking at the INN 5710. Also can be a bit of a tricky thing to fill out. And we do have a sample, and this is what it looks like. Once again, the most important thing is making sure you download the form from your immigration account, because that will ensure that that is the most recent form. Believe it or not, if you submit an old one that's already out of date, even though it kind of almost looks exactly the same, application will be returned to you. And that doesn't necessarily happen right away. You could be waiting 2 months, and so always download it from your account. So it's fairly straightforward from the first page, personal information, your background in terms of your student status, your dates, And we do have a sample INM 5710 to share with you, and it answers some of the tricky pieces of it as well. And if Janet there it is. So as you can see, straightforward, you're clicking on work permit, your first name, last name, any other names you've had before. The rest is all your personal information. Under your status, of course, you are a student and you're looking for your student status. So ideally, when you first came to Canada, the issuance of your study permit until the study permit extension. Now, there are some of you who are also residents of other countries. For example, say you are an Indian national, but at the same time, your family and you have been in the UAE for several years and you happen to be a resident there. You would need to identify that on the application as well. Okay, and we keep moving down. Pretty straightforward information about your status, your language, passport information, national identity document. Very confusing for students. This question is asked in all of the applications. It is an identity document, not of Canada, of your home country. That is what they're looking for. Okay, so just remember that. Contact information, very straightforward. Just make sure that you put everything in the right box. Cell phone numbers, contact address, your email address. Coming to Canada, they're looking for your day that you arrive. If you can't remember, please check your passport. And they're looking for the city, not the airport. And the last time that you traveled. And if you haven't traveled since you arrived, of course, you leave that blank. The details of your intended work. If you look at the drop-down menu under section 1 there's multiple. So this form is used for multiple types of work permit, as you can see. And for now, of course, you're identifying co-op work permit. And the way to fill out the employment section, because of course you don't know who your employer or employers are going to be. So as a default, you enter Acadia. And of course, the address will be created to be determined. City and province as a default, because you can't leave it blank. You can put Wolfville, Nova Scotia, even though it doesn't matter. You could be doing your placement out in Alberta or Manitoba. Title and job description as well is to be determined. The duration of expected employment. So what the form is asking you here is how long you want your co-op for. And the from date is always the day you're doing the application. So we have today's date of October 4th, and we are looking for an extension, ideally up to the end of your study permit. Now, if you're applying for an extension of the study permit as well, you would be putting that length of the how long you want your study permit for as well. Okay. Next in education, if you've done any post-secondary before Acadia, that's where you enter it. If you haven't, you enter no. For employment, what immigration is looking for here is not necessarily your part-time jobs, but something needs to go there or else the form will not validate. So as a default, you can enter student. That's your primary activity, really. You are a student at Acadia and you enter your start date of when you started your program. And you can leave the to date blank because you haven't finished yet. Okay. There are some students who put their co-ops from before, and that's okay too. The background information is fairly straightforward, and you need to answer the questions honestly, yes or no. And of course, if there is a no, they do want to know, or if there's a yes, I should say, they want to have a brief explanation in the text box below. Number 2 is the most common one that students do indicate yes. Of course, if you've ever been refused, you need to acknowledge that, not only in this application, but in any application that you do here for immigration in Canada, and you need to briefly explain it. It does not need to be in detail. You don't need application numbers, anything like that. You just need to identify that my study permit was refused in 2023, reapplied again. That's it. You don't need to get into very specifics. I do an example here. It was refused due to a lack of funds, whatever it may be. And number 2C, everyone should be saying yes to this because, of course, you have applied for a document or to come to Canada, and that was when you first applied for your study permit and visa. So you essentially need to write all of the application history, starting with your study permit and visa. And if you've applied since then, if extended, you can enter that, or put a comma, apply for study permit from home, comma, apply for an extension in 2021, comma, apply for a co-op permit in 2022, and then you just keep going. Having expiry dates, passport, application numbers is not necessary. Then we move on, and the application at this point is almost done. You pretty much acknowledge, normally I encourage students to say yes, because you do want to be contacted in case there's any additional information that's required in order for the officer to make a decision. You don't type your name. You do type your name, I should say. You just don't sign it. I know there's a lot of confusion about please sign your form, but you don't sign these forms. And you should always date it on the day that you do the form. And once everything is filled out, you do validate the document. Once you validate the document, it creates, and of course, our document is not full, so it's going to be all red everywhere, which is a good indicator that maybe you've missed something. But once it's successfully validated, it creates this sixth page with barcodes. And that's how the computer system at the Immigration Processing Center reads your application. So it takes all that information from the barcodes and dumps it into the system instead of having someone to type it in. So that is the IMN 5710. It can be a little tricky to do. Like I said, it's a PDF document. Once you validate, always good then to save it, rename it, so you're not uploading the wrong one. I've had that before. Students had so many of them open, they didn't know which one was the final version. So make sure you know. You upload everything, and then what becomes your signature is actually your security question. They're going to ask you a question that you created, and of course, only you know the answer. And that then becomes your digital signature. Always good to save a confirmation of the transmission for your records. In addition, the immigration could contact you for additional documents. This happens more often than you think. One of the things to be mindful of is they always give you the deadline, and they're very strict on that deadline. It's usually 7 days. Don't submit the document. Within that period of time, I can assure you they will cancel your application. So if you do receive one of those requests, please reach out. Another thing that can be challenging for students is the upload of the document itself. It's tricky to go back into your account and upload the document. A lot of times students do that, but they forget to transmit, which means it was never really sent. It was placed, but not sent. That also creates a refusal, and IRCC is not very accommodating in those circumstances. For those of you who are extending a co-op permit or your study permit at the same time, there is a special regulation called maintain status, which means that if you're applying for an extension of a co-op and a study permit, or just a co-op permit, you have what is called maintain status, which allows you to begin your placement while waiting for your second co-op permit to come through, which is great. If you apply for a renewal of a co-op permit or study and your permit expires before the decision is made, you still have the right to continue working or studying under the same conditions pending the determination of the application. So that's really important to know. The co-op, of course, once again, it's only can be used for co-op work only, and it's valid normally until the end of your study permit. Be mindful once again of those restrictions. If you are working or plan to be doing any of that work experience in any of these settings, please do your immigration medical exam now. While you're waiting, for the co-op permit to be processed. And it does happen. It still hasn't arrived. What can I do? If you haven't had one before, you cannot begin working. You could only use your study permit to start working that co-op placement. However, you are only limited to 20 hours per week as of now. Of course, that may change in the future, which we hope soon. But as of now, if you're still waiting for that co-op permit, you're starting in January, hasn't arrived by January, you can begin, but only 20 hours a week, provided, of course, that your employer is willing to accommodate you with just 20 hours per week off campus. If it's on campus and you're with Acadia doing your placement, then you're okay because it's on campus work and there's unlimited hours on campus. Work permit conditions. My co-op permit says not authorized to work with any other employer stated. I know that it's clearly written there, not to worry. Your school, as I mentioned, is always listed as the employer, and it is a mechanism to process the permit, but it is also, in fact, it is the university that authorizes the work. But it does mean that you can work for any employer anywhere in Canada, provided that your school or your co-op office or program agrees to that placement. Okay, so not to worry about that. Processing time, unfortunately, as I mentioned, a very long time. As of October 1st, it's 130 days. Now, despite the time that it's listed here, I do find that it's inconsistent in processing time. Some students get a little bit earlier, some it takes longer than 130 days. So the rule of thumb here is to apply as early as you can. So if you know that you have a placement in the spring of 2025, apply now. If you have your co-op proof, your support letter from the co-op office or from your department, now's a good time to do that. Okay. As I mentioned, when can I start my placement? So in most cases, you do have to wait, especially if you don't have a co-op permit before. If your placement begins during the scheduled break in your program, it may be possible to start under the authorizations provided as your study permit, as I mentioned, the 20 hours per week max. If your current co-op permit, if you had a co-op permit, and you're extending it, then of course you have that wonderful maintained status, which allows you to begin your placement while waiting for your second co-op permit to arrive. Updates and changes. So, as you know, immigration is changing now more than ever, constantly. So it's always good to keep things changing. I know as well as with yourself, you could be moving. Make sure to update your application, especially if you are moving. In order to make those changes, you can use the IRCC web form, which is listed below here. It's also good to keep up to date on what's going on. So make sure to check the IRCC website out for updates. Resources, lots of resources available to you at the IRCC website, and it's always good to go to the website. I know that there's a lot of forums out there, YouTube videos, but one of the things that I keep telling students is always go to the source, because if things change, if immigration changes or any regulations, that's where it's going to be noted in the IRCC website first, not necessarily on those other websites. So always good to go to the source. Great information there on co-op application process there. Processing time, great website there. Checking your application status. It's really improved a lot and really tracks your application and what they're doing. So highly recommend doing that after you apply to see how things are progressing with your application. And lastly, we're at the end, and this is where we are going to stop the recording and open up the floor to questions.
I actually have a question. Sorry. Something I often hear from students is I don't need to apply for the co-op permit because my study permit comes